Hello and welcome today to the Christian Construction Podcast. We're here with Brother Josh Montgomery, Brother Matt Panther, and myself, Michael Lindsay, and we're going to talk about the ministry of a young preacher. So we hope you'll stay tuned today here on the Christian Construction Podcast. All right, well, it's good to be here, Brother Josh. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Brother Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Brother Matt, how are you?
Wonderful.
Amen. Amen. Well, we at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of our winter revival, January 2020, all of that. And so this may not be airing until mid to late February, but as of right now, we are in the middle of revival meeting. Brother Josh is here with us, fixing to start the second day of meeting. And I had a great service last night. Brother Mullins preached tremendous. And, the only thing about when Brother Mullins preaches, it's very convicting. And so I got to deal with all that stuff all night.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's very, very convicting, very strong, moving to the Holy Spirit on the saints of God, challenged to pray. And then we had a great day on Sunday with Brother Voles. Brother Voles, by the way, I would guess just a few weeks ago, we interviewed him. Do you have any thoughts on Brother Voles?
Was that a long interview?
Actually, it's the only time we've done anything with Brother Keith that was done in less than 30 minutes. So,
wow. Hearing Brother Keith Voles preach, he's my buddy, but hearing Brother Keith Voles preach is a lot like heaven. There is no time there. He's like my best friend. Besides Brother Michael.
Until now.
Until now.
Until this airs.
I hope he sees it.
He don't know how to work technology. So anyway,
yeah, that's true.
he was asking. So now what is this? What is this? What is this air on? We're gonna be on camera. So he shows up in a ball cap, as many of you can go back and watch.
Yeah.
Brother Keith in his ball cap and what kind of shirt did he have on?
He told me he just had a T-shirt on.
It was, yeah. We was fixing to go play ball or something. I don't know, man.
Yeah, first step towards compromise.
He's young. I'm telling you, these young preachers looking like thugs. No, I'm kidding. We had a great time with Brother Keith, and we actually talked about what is a biblical evangelist.
Yes.
It was very good, very informative. I thought it was.
Absolutely.
So we had a great time doing that, and then, of course, we've had interviews recently with Brother Andy Wells, Brother Robert Jones, and again, Brother Montgomery here today with us. And so we're very thankful for you stopping by to be a part of the podcast. And so, Brother Josh, just as a way of introduction, just so people know you, give some credibility to the things we're going to be talking about, would you just give us a brief testimony of your salvation, your dad growing up in a pastor's home, and then your call to the ministry, and then we'll jump right into this topic right after that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate what you guys are doing here on the podcast. It's good to have good material out there to listen to, and I always enjoy it. I got saved when I was 5 years old. I was raised in a preacher's home. My dad, Brother Alan Montgomery, was missionary Rock of Ages for several years, and now he's pastoring, and got saved at 5 years old, and then at 10 years old, actually at 9 years old, God began to deal in my heart about preaching, and my dad showed a lot of wisdom, and it made me wait a year and pray about it and make sure it wasn't just an emotional thing in a service, something like that. And I waited almost, and I didn't even plan it, 1 year to the week, and I was at youth camp, and confirmed that, and God called me to preach. I was 10 years old, and I'm 28 now. I've been preaching, been pastoring. Well, I guess when this podcast airs, the last Sunday of January is my 7-year anniversary at our church, Safe Harbor Baptist in Salisbury, North Carolina. And I'm thankful for the great heritage that I have and the opportunity that I have to serve the Lord. He don't have to let me. I'm glad he does.
And your dad left Rock of Ages, went to pastor New Grace in Concord.
Yes, sir.
And what year did he get there?
Daddy went to New Grace in November of 2005. Okay. So this November will be 15 years.
So you surrendered to the ministry in... What, 01, 02?
2002.
2002?
Yes, sir.
So from 2005 to, let me do my math real quick. So you were there approximately 7-8 years as a young preacher.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was.
Under your dad being the pastor.
Yes, sir.
So for credibility purposes, Brother Josh not only grew up in a pastor's home, 7-8 years as a young preacher, sitting at the feet of his pastor, which is also his dad, and then now been pastoring for almost at the time that this is airing 7 years.
Yes, sir.
And so today we're going to talk about the ministry of a young preacher. Now, we have talked about this subject before. If you was to go back, I think it was we did episode 2. We did a first part and a second part in episode 2, and that was young preachers finding their place in the local church. And us being, well, the people that are normally on here with me, Gabe, Matt, and Keith, being young preachers. I'm not necessarily a young preacher. I'm a younger preacher. But us, at one time, I was a young preacher. Brother Josh, you're still a young preacher. I know you're pastor.
I'm still.
So,
We believe you're still young.
so a lot.
Young at
I
heart.
appreciate
Young
it.
at heart.
Young at
World
heart,
tell
just
you
not
otherwise.
just not young in hair. So, we a lot of times it just bleeds out. You can't help but let it come out.
Sure.
We do realize there are a lot of young preachers and young people in the ministry that are maybe not preachers, but maybe they're in the ministry. So we address a lot of those issues from time to time. So what we want to talk about today, if you wanted to go back and watch that episode, you could. We're going to try to do something similar to that, but maybe catch it at another angle. We're going to talk about today the ministry of a young preacher. And so Brother Josh has got some things. We're going to kick some of it around, talk about it. One of the things that I do want to make mention of, if you watched the episode with Brother Keith, he made mention, Keith Voyles that is, that when he felt like God was dealing with him about the call to preach, that, and he's probably told you this,
Sure.
that it was a few, maybe 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
That his parents made him wait. And same situation,
Right,
9,
absolutely.
10, 11 years old, Lord dealing with him, and they just made him wait. And I think that's great, just the wisdom to make sure that he's ready and willing to make that commitment and make that step forward. And your dad having the wisdom
Yes.
to do that.
Well,
with
you know this. You work with young people, and obviously, and young people can get in a service.
Yes.
I watched the podcast the other day on y'all doing emotionalism.
Yes.
Back earlier this year, or last year rather. And it's easy for a young person to get caught up in a service, and especially for a young man, I think they see the notoriety that the other young man gets because he's preaching.
Sure.
And I've seen this. I know you have, Brother Matt. They want that notoriety when it's not
Absolutely.
about the notoriety,
Absolutely.
but everybody says, "Oh man, that guy's a young preacher." And I wonder if that's some of our fault too, to a certain extent, that we maximize young preachers over just other young men who are not called to preach. But we need young men that are not preachers that'll be faithful laymen in the church
Absolutely.
too.
Absolutely.
So I think it's good to wait and confirm and make sure you know that is God's will for your life.
That's absolutely right. I believe that to be the truth, Brother Matt. I don't know if you kind of like with Brother Keith was talking about this in his interview, that in the atmosphere, the culture, church culture he grew up in, there were a lot of young men.
Absolutely.
And as it panned out, many of them, he said by their own testimony now, they're not even living the life of a Christian, let alone a preacher.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know, Brother Josh, we'll see if you agree with me. There's a lot of young men I knew that were, a little older than me. Some come after me. And, when I meet one that says they just announce their call to preach, or I hear of somebody, I normally try to have a conversation with them, because something I've seen is it normally takes a year or two that things kick into their life. They start struggling with, not getting the calls to come in.
Right.
So I tell them all the same thing, for the first year or two, maybe 3, I call them petty calls. I mean, you're not getting called to come in to preach because
I still get those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's why I get called.
Yeah.
Did you refer that as pity calls?
Pity calls.
Pity
yeah.
calls.
You're not getting called in because you're
People
the greatest
having
evangelist.
pity on you.
You're not the greatest evangelist in the world. They're calling you in because they love you. They want to give you the opportunity,
Give you a chance.
and give you a place. But after that, those are done. There's a little span of time there that you're probably not going to get much. And, I've had a lot of conversations with young preachers who are in year 2, year 3, year 4, and they'll say, man, I just ain't nobody calling, and it weighs on them. It gets in their mind. And I've seen a lot of them quit.
Oh, yeah.
Just from that,
The notoriety's gone.
The notoriety, as Brother Josh was saying, the notoriety of it's gone. They get in that service. I'm sure it'd be real easy now. Something that when I announce my call to preach, I can tell you, I'll tell you now, and I've told people the whole time, I had no desire to preach.
Right.
My dad, he was my pastor my entire life, and had a lot of problems as a pastor. And Dad, we joke around with him, me and my older brother Jonathan. We do now joke around about having a ministry of suffering, and that's a lot of what it was. And my own self, you know, I didn't have no desire to get into that. I didn't want anything to do with it. But I knew the Lord called me.
Right.
I knew the Lord had placed that calling in my life. And but I'm afraid a lot of them, they come out of homes that never had anything to do with the ministry.
That's right.
You know, they come out of homes that had nothing to do with ministry, so all they see is standing behind the pulpit and people shouting, and you know, they getting the love offering when they get done preaching. All they see is that, and not the heartaches, not the pain that comes along with it. It ain't all heartache and pain, but it does come.
Preaching's the easy part.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
right.
That's right.
And you know, it's real easy. But I tell them all the time, you know, you're going to get that. You're going to get to that point where the call's going to quit coming.
Yep.
And that's up to you to find a place. That's up to you to find somewhere.
And there
to be.
are plenty of places. There's nursing homes. There's street corners. There's for us. We have bus ministry. We have children's ministries. There's all kinds of places and opportunities to preach. Brother Josh, I know that you've got a good. Really an outline. He said you may actually preach this. It just depends on how it goes.
Depends on how it goes.
Yeah, right.
Depends on how good the offering is, too.
Well, hey, there's 4 of us here. We'll take one up.
As Brother Andy says, we'll give you the same thing he gives his.
Never mind.
Well, Brother Josh, you go ahead and we're the guinea pigs. Brother Keith's behind the soundboard. He says we're the guinea pigs.
Now you know how my church feels. Well, I think the first thing for a young preacher, he needs to make sure his conversion is settled.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like Bo Stamp Ballou said, every preacher ought to be saved.
It helps.
It really does.
It really
makes a difference. And I'm an outliner. You call and must be sure. You don't. I'm telling you, God. And I know years ago, men were saying, just volunteer. That sounds good, but
Sounds
God
spiritual.
puts a call on a man's life.
Absolutely. Supernatural call.
Yes, I believe that.
Let me ask you a question while you're right there. What about a man who has said he's saved, he said he's called to preach, and then he realizes he's lost? Does he need to step away from the ministry or step down from the ministry once he gets saved? Maybe we should air this part of it. There is a lot of complicated parts to that question, I understand. Because you have Paul, who at the moment of his conversion, God told him what he was going to use him for. But at the same time, Paul sat, if I understand the timeline correctly, for at least maybe 2 or 3 years, even sat in services where people testified of what they had heard about this tyrant who had gotten saved and never opened his mouth. Isn't that
what I would say about that is Pastor Chad Bailey would be glad to answer any of those
He'll
questions.
be up next, so we'll let him take care of it.
You might want to edit that.
Yeah. All right, so go ahead. It's just a thought, just something to throw out. Maybe we'll talk about it your next trip in.
Yeah. Thanks for the preparation on that one. I say this. You got me all messed up, man. You are going to edit this, right?
No, probably not. So,
but yeah, you need
Gabe. Don't cut this out when you're editing. Please don't cut this out.
Gabe, whatever he's paying you, I'll double it. But I believe the calling of God is vitally important because volunteering in the emotional moment, boy, that sounds great. But like Brother Matt said, when you're not getting the calls. And when you're not getting the notoriety and things of that nature, it'll wear on you.
Absolutely.
And then I believe, and I'll tell you, my generation of preachers have some convictions and standards.
Absolutely.
Even as a young preacher. Brother Doug Raines made a statement. I was in a meeting the other day, and he made the statement. He said, find out what you believe, why you believe it out of the book, and then die with it.
That's exactly right. That's
at a young age.
Yeah.
And, of course, we continue to grow in the Lord, but get some things nailed down right now.
That's right.
And I believe that because, obviously, we see the way the culture is going.
Shift.
And that's exactly right. And then I know Brother Keith talked about this. You better be committed in your church.
Sure. Absolutely.
I don't want to hear a man preach who's not any man, but it's not committed to his local church. And I know Brother Keith really dealt with that, and I don't want to belabor that, but I believe that's an important part.
Brother, I think here's the way what's the way our pastor operates. Every preacher, God will put them in a ministry.
Yes,
I believe that. And in that ministry, they're going to want if they're any type of a preacher at all, they're going to want the pastor and the church to stand behind that ministry. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's asking too much for that young preacher to stand behind the ministry of the church as well. Everybody, every missionary, every young preacher wants the church to help them, push them, promote them, support them, but then what about when the church needs help? When the church has revival meeting, are you going to be sure that you're there? We talked about that with Brother Keith,
Right.
about when his church has revival. He says it happened one time. It was spare of the moment. He was already 2 or 3 states away, and Preacher Massengale told him, do not come home. And he said, it was the worst I ever felt preaching because I knew that my church had a meeting going on. And
I wasn't in my
there.
place.
So,
yeah. I'll say this too, not only committed to your church, but I believe taking counsel from your shepherd.
sure.
Something I've been studying on and preaching on. We, as young preachers, you need to be careful who you listen to. Not
Yes.
every man that carries a Bible and calls himself a preacher deserves the opportunity to influence you.
That's right.
Amen.
Your pastor is your main influence.
Absolutely.
And you follow his leadership. And I'll say this, I believe young preachers ought to listen to preaching.
Yes.
When I was, and I still do, but when I was a young preacher, I carried cassette tapes around, CDs.
You're going to have to explain that to some people. So, cassette tapes.
The worst thing about a cassette tape is having to get your pencil and
Dial it back, yeah.
But I listened to preaching, but I did not listen to any preacher. There were some preachers my dad said, do not listen to this guy. Here's why. He had some bad habits in his language, in his mannerisms, and who you listen to, it'll rub off on you.
That's who you become.
And you better be careful who you listen to and who you give attention to.
If we talked about this, you talked about when you first got here, Brother Matt has a background, coming from his dad being his pastor. So when he got here, he just went to pastor and he said, is there anybody, here's preachers I listen to, here's preachers I grew up with, are there any of these people that you think I don't need to listen to or that might lead me a bad way? And preacher picked some out, and
Very
told
well.
us
That's
you
very
need to
wise.
stay away from this one. And so we believe in that. And
Yeah.
I think that's the road to success for a young preacher, for God to use them in a particular manner, is going to be that way.
You can always be influenced by a lot of different preachers, but if your greatest influence is not your pastor, you're doing something wrong.
I believe that's right. I believe that's right.
So I wanted to make sure that was my goal in it. Number one, so that those looking at me seen him.
Yes.
Seen my pastor, and who are you listening to, who you reading after, whatnot. They wouldn't see me, but they would see the direction of my pastor, and in all that, see the Lord in it.
Right.
And then number two, safety.
Yes.
When I go to the Lord and say, one of these days I'll stand before the Lord for things I've done, and the Lord talks about the Lord questions me about this, questions me about that, I'll be able to say, hey, pastor said it was all right,
That's exactly
there's a lot of safety in just following what your man says. And, the Lord, your pastor can carry a lot, can bear a lot that you won't have to answer for if you'll just follow him.
Absolutely. That's
Amen.
right. Brother Josh.
I'll say this too. Follow your pastor's leadership. You're not going to like everything he says. He's part of the pastor's ministry. A young preacher is knocking him down a few notches. Because I'm telling you, you preach in that nursing home, and that woman who was asleep wakes up, and man, you think it's a big revival meeting now, and you think you've got it. You've got 2 Sundays booked for the year, and you're the next great evangelist, and and I'm not trying to be critical, but
That's
I'm
the
just
truth.
been there, done
Have
that.
we all not all been there? That's right.
We carry a calendar around, and we don't have to carry a calendar because we know the 2 meetings that we have for the year.
Let me check my calendar.
Yeah, let me check my calendar. Somebody says, you got that Sunday open? Yes.
Flip through.
My joke is,
I believe I do.
my joke is, my preacher friends, if you want me to come for a revival meeting, you better hurry. I only got 52 weeks open. Actually, I only have 50 weeks open. I take July 4th and Christmas off. But what I'm saying is, he's going to have to knock you down a few notches sometimes, especially when that pride gets up. Didn't Paul talk about in 1 Timothy chapter 3, not a novice, us being lifted up with pride, he fall in condemnation of the devil.
Absolutely. And is that not one of the downfalls of a young preacher, is being lifted up in pride?
Absolutely.
And we've all been there.
Yes,
we've all
sir.
been there, and the Lord had to deal with us about it.
And it's really bad when God deals with it with you in the pulpit.
That's right. Yes.
That's embarrassing.
That's embarrassing. That's humiliating.
Yes.
But, the Bible says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. And the reason he tells us to humble ourselves is so he don't have to. So when he has to do it,
Unfortunately,
it's a lot easier.
Unfortunately, he has humbled me in front of a congregation many times.
I don't know that any of us have followed that. Humble yourselves. We always have to have the Lord do it for some reason.
Seems like it's always on the Lord to have to deal with us about that. I've thought about this too. Sometimes a young preacher, it's not just the ministry side. Sometimes it might be something in your personality. I won't name the preacher and the young preacher. They're both good friends of mine. But the pastor said years ago that he said he had this young preacher come to him, and this young preacher, he testified. He said, yeah, that is exactly what happened. And the young preacher come to him and said, preacher, what can I do better? What can I do better? Is there anything about me that's wrong? And the preacher just said, well, no, you're fine. Just keep digging. And he gave him those generic answers. He said, no, preacher, really, is there anything that you see, anything I could do better? And he just kept on. The preacher finally around, he said, I'll tell you one thing you could do better is shut up. You talk too much. People would like you better. Your ministry would be smoother. You'd be more effective if you would just shut up sometimes. And he said at first it hurt his feelings. He said, but then I realized, I need to listen to my pastor. He hears and sees things from a perspective that I don't see. Not to mention he is my spiritual authority that God's put in my life to help me and mold me into the minister, into the preacher that God wants me to be.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you this: God honors submission.
Yes,
God honors that. And I'll say this: another aspect in the young preacher, especially as you get older, you need to be careful in choosing a spouse.
Yes.
Because, man, that can wreck it'll make it or break it.
Yes.
And I remember years ago, preachers preaching, God's got one out there for you, but the devil's got one out there to ruin you.
Yeah.
And as a young preacher, you can testify to this. You preach youth meetings, before you married. Yeah. And they'll line up, want you to sign their Bible and all that. Boy, I'm telling you, you better be careful.
Dangerous.
Yes, dangerous.
I mean, it can ruin you. It's your whole life. It's your whole life on the line. And I can't tell you how many preachers that because of their wife, because she thought she was ready, or maybe that preacher thought I'll change her. The Lord will knit us all together and everything will work out. A lot of times it don't really work that way.
Yeah.
There are some miracles. There's some grace that God has on people that maybe God saved that man and then called that man and that wife got saved, and all of that happened after they got married. There's a lot of those, and sometimes we hang on to those. Those are oftentimes the exception, though, right?
Sure. Yeah.
God having mercy on a person and giving grace in an area is different than someone who knows what's right and they choose to take a different path.
Right.
So, I mean, we've all seen our share of that.
Yeah, and this may sound cruel too, but I don't think a young preacher needs to be, I don't know if I can say this, he don't need to be a player.
Well, you just said it.
Did I just say it?
You said it.
You can edit it off.
No, I ain't edited it. I think you're
He
100% right.
He don't need to have 25 different girlfriends in a 3-year span.
Rico Suave.
Yeah, if he can't discern God, that
Don't look
Nobody
that up,
knows
children.
who that is, bro.
Don't look that up, children.
I'm with you on that one. I don't know what he's talking about.
Don't be a player. Don't be a player. Thank you, Brother Josh, for this wonderful advice you've just given us. But it's the truth. It's the truth. What you do is you lose your credibility.
That's exactly right.
In knowing, in people having confidence that you are, first of all, serious
Good luck
about the
preaching on the
ministry.
will of God.
Preaching on the will of God. How in the world are you going to do that? It's no different than a man that. All right, so if you had a pastor that jumped from church to church, you would look at him and say, well, that man obviously is struggling.
He'd have a hard time preaching on faithfulness.
That's the truth. Well, the same way we would view that, other people are going to view you, especially your peers. Now, you might empower them to an extent, but over time they're going to see that the Kool-Aid is a little on the poisonous side, and they don't want to drink none of it.
Right,
okay?
right.
So anyway,
I know that was random. You might want to edit that out, but I'm just saying that.
Don't be a player.
Hey,
You heard it first here, folks.
You heard it first on the CCP.
Well, what it does, it causes, as a preacher, you're to have a testimony, a good name, and what you're doing when you do that, you're losing your effectiveness.
That's exactly right.
And you only get one name.
That's right.
yeah.
My youth pastor used to say, it takes a lifetime to build a testimony and just a second to destroy one.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so I believe you ought to be careful with that. And then, man, study the Word of God. I'll tell you, I look back on messages I preached, in my teenage years. I'm like, that's not even in the Bible.
Yeah.
But, it made them shout. And I'm, as a young preacher, it's in every young preacher's heart and mind. I want to preach to make them shout.
Make them shout.
Yeah.
Make them shout. But that does good for a little while. But when you get to pastoring and dealing with people every week.
Every now and then I'll look through some old notebooks, sermon notebooks, and think, man, how does he not even fit in that text?
Oh, my dad got on me one time. My dad used to read my outlines before he let me preach. True story. And so I never forget. I was getting ready to preach in a meeting, and I was on the rapture kick, and I didn't have the rapture and second coming exactly corrected. I got it figured out now,
It's been good.
I was tying First Thessalonians.
Is this on CD somewhere?
No, it might be on cassette. But I had First Thessalonians 4 and Revelation 19. I was running them side by side and didn't even notice the difference. And finally, Dad looked at me one day and said, "Does every message have to end with the rapture?" I said, "Well, that is the end, I mean, correcting, have some sense in your outline. Rightly dividing.
I think it would be, this might fit, don't preach over your head. I mean, I'm the same way. I did that, and maybe sometimes I'm guilty of that now, but don't preach over your head. Brother Tony Hudson, who may or may not be the authority on this, has said, he said, and Brother Tony's a friend of ours, so, yes. All right, Brother Josh. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. He has said, I may not know much, but the things I know good. And I think that's good advice for a young preacher. If you don't know much, know what you know and know it well.
Right.
And then preach what you know. Don't preach the stuff you don't know. You know what I try not to preach? The stuff I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not.
One fellow said, my best messages on the family was before I got married.
That's most of mine words.
Yeah,
I mean, you knew everything then.
Yeah, now I don't know anything.
Yeah, I knew back then. I knew all the answers. Now I don't even know.
Well, the truth of the matter is, I've been going to church for 24 years now, since the time I was born, and I'm yet to hear a young preacher preach a Bible conference or a prophecy conference or any of that.
Or a marriage conference.
Yeah, there is a reason. There is a reason.
There's a reason you're not getting called to preach in those meetings. You preach in a Friday night youth meeting, preach what they know, where they're living at.
Right.
And the Lord will bless it.
But study out just don't, I used to look for 3 points and everything, because, it ain't a message unless it has 3 points. It's not from God.
Yeah.
Unless you have 3 points.
You don't want to have
intro,
5
body,
points.
No.
You get accused of being a
intro,
coward.
body, conclusion, sub points for each point.
Now, I'm a sub pointer
3,
guy.
5, or 7.
I am
Those
too.
are all
Yeah,
the
I'm
numbers.
a
run with
sub pointer guy.
sub-points.
Oh, you can't have 2 points.
But if you have 2 points, it's division.
Yeah, and alliteration. Oh, man.
You have to have,
But,
you have to have at least 3. If you have more than 3, it's got to be 5. If you have more than 5, it's got to be 6.
because 4 is an odd number. Well, I mean, it's not an odd number, but it's an odd number in outline.
It's odd number in outline
Yeah.
world.
So anyway,
I love it. I don't know how we got on that, but
be saved if you're going to preach. No.
yeah, don't be a player.
Don't preach over your head. And,
Yeah,
and
don't.
study the Word of God.
And can I say this too?
Yeah, well, you're going to say it, so.
Don't look like a bum.
Praise God.
Now I'm not.
No, that needs to be said.
I'm not saying
I'm
you have to
embarrassed.
buy your suits at Joseph A. Banks and you have to look, fancy all the time. I understand everybody might not have the financial means, but you can be clean cut. You can have your clothes ironed. You can match.
Absolutely.
Outside of salvation, my wife, I think Hagar's the greatest gift of God I ever got.
Hallelujah.
And we ain't talking about the book of Genesis and
Yeah,
Abraham and Sarah.
Hagar went out in the wilderness and opened up a suit store.
That's where she's been all these
Yeah.
years.
But what
Some
I'm
guy named Ishmael's the
And-
CFO.
And I guess this is a pet peeve of mine too. But since we're here, don't look like a lollipop.
That's exactly right.
I mean, and
Y'all look like
I
y'all
went
fell
through that.
into a
I went through
pool
that.
of sugar at Willy Wonka.
Yeah, don't have on an orange suit where you're looking like you're.
Creamsicle.
And yes, I do have somebody in mind, but I'm just saying
I have said
you're losing your credibility because you look like Bozo the Clown.
That's the truth. No, that's right.
And somebody said, "Well, that's not important." Well, they're looking at you.
Well,
you need to. You don't see Pastor Philbeck wearing
No.
a royal blue.
Right.
And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong in that regard, but as a young preacher, stick with blues and grays and blacks.
Earth tones.
Maybe
We're going to wear some earth tones today.
maybe a little tan. I don't know.
Maybe a little tan. But
What I'm saying,
no.
look like a preacher is what I'm saying.
This is what I say.
Yeah.
Don't expect people to take your call serious if you don't take your call serious.
Right.
For instance, and everybody don't do this, but pastor wants me to, and I did this before I worked at the church because my pastor taught me this. When you go to make visits, when you go to the hospital, and every preacher don't do this. I'm just telling you what my pastor taught me.
Right.
And that is, look like a preacher.
Right.
Look like a preacher. I go in businesses around town, and they say, wow, you dress so nice. And all I'm doing is I'm wearing a suit and tie. I'm going in to visit, I'm wearing a suit and tie. I go to get my oil change, I got a suit and tie. I'm going down to get supplies for something here at church, go to the bank, whatever, suit and tie. And you know what I tell them? I say, well, I'm a preacher, I'm supposed to dress nice.
Right.
And so they immediately know that I take this serious.
Right.
Amen.
That's the whole point. When you're dressing like, and I'm not trying to be critical, when you're dressing like Bozo the Clown, or even now, I don't believe a young preacher ought to come to church unless he's coming from work and he can't help it. I understand.
Right, absolutely.
Things like that, that's understandable. He needs to have a tie on.
Absolutely.
He needs to look like a
Amen.
preacher.
Take the call.
Take it seriously because the church is watching.
Absolutely.
And they are paying attention to that. And I know you're getting close on time, but I think the worst thing a young preacher can do is promote himself.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think that is one of the worst things he can do because we think now, I've got to get my name out there so they'll call me.
Well, what we're showing is that we don't trust God to do it.
Right. God's not big enough to tell that pastor to call you.
Right.
So you're going to have to, promote yourself and elevate yourself.
Make my calendar available.
Josh
on
Montgomery
Google.
Ministries.
Oh, if I hear another ministry named after a preacher, I'm on like Brother Sandwich. I'm gonna vomit.
I'm gonna vomit out of my throat.
What is the point of that?
Self promotion.
It really is.
Is it not some measure of pride?
I would say so.
I would say so.
But
I don't even think it's debatable. It's definitely pride.
Yeah,
The one sin that God really, really, really hates.
Yeah, I mean, it did get the devil kicked out of heaven.
Abomination.
It
Pretty
is
serious stuff.
Don't promote yourself. God's big enough to get you where you need to be. I'll give you this: the church I'm pastoring now. You know how I got connected to that church? I was with my church supporting our local camp meeting, singing in the choir, doing the special music, just there in the camp meeting. And the pastor walked up to me and said, would you come preach a fifth Sunday night service for me? That's the first time I walked in that church. And now I'm the pastor of that church today. Not because I was going around, and I'm not bragging on myself, but I wasn't handing out business cards, and I didn't, have my name plastered all over my vehicle, have Bible will preach, kind of stuff. I mean.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's strong right there now.
Well,
No,
I
but it's true.
was with my local church and my pastor.
Serving
and
in
the
the local
opportunity came to me, and now that's where I'm serving now.
Absolutely.
In that church.
That's right. Well, Brother Josh, thank you. You got to come back sometime. I mean,
I don't know.
You're a little over an hour away.
Oh, I would love to.
So
I just don't know if
get
I
you
can
back.
handle it.
We're going to get you back down, and we're going
All them playboys out there.
all them players have done turned us off, but
You might want to edit that one.
I don't. They didn't. They probably didn't get past the first one where you said you need to be saved. So anyway, so let's we'll go ahead and conclude this episode today. Thank you, Brother Josh, for coming by. Thank you, Brother
Thank you
Matt.
for having me.
And we hope you'll continue to like, share, review, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Whatever platform you watch it on.
It has been said, share if you care.
Share if you care. And so just do that. Again,
I guess it ain't going to be shared.
It's so that we don't sound hypocritical. It's not self-promotion. It is just simply trying to get help, another tool, another resource out to be a help to the church. And again, this is about building the body of Christ. We thank you for tuning in today. Again, this is a ministry of the Love Valley Baptist Church. Our pastor is Barry Philbeck. And so you can visit our website, come by and visit us here at the church, 2032 Bethlehem Road, Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And so we hope you'll continue to tune in. Thank you for watching today here on the Christian Construction Podcast.